Have you ever given so much of yourself that, in the end, you had nothing left to give? Maybe you've poured your heart, time, and resources into helping others, only to find yourself drained, frustrated, or even resentful. Generosity is often hailed as one of the greatest virtues, and rightly so. There is a beauty in giving selflessly. But what happens when generosity, despite its good intentions, starts to hurt you? What happens when it becomes toxic? The truth is, generosity, when taken to extremes or practiced without boundaries, can be more harmful than helpful. You may have experienced or witnessed the all-too-common scenario where someone gives so much that they lose sight of their own well-being, sacrificing their own needs and happiness in the process. This is what we call toxic generosity. It's the kind of giving that comes at the cost of your own peace, health, and sometimes even your identity. It's the unspoken pain of constantly pouring into others, only to feel empty inside. But what if this kind of giving isn't what we were meant to do? What if, instead of liberating us, it's holding us back? The surprising reality is that spiritual leaders, therapists, and even ancient texts from around the world have all pointed to the dangers of this kind of generosity. They agree that generosity must be rooted in balance, wisdom, and self-awareness. In this video, we're going to explore what spiritual leaders, therapists, and ancient wisdom have to say about toxic generosity. We'll dive into how to recognize when your giving is doing more harm than good, and how to reclaim generosity in a way that enriches your life and the lives of others, without leaving you depleted. We'll learn how these different perspectives offer timeless wisdom for finding a healthier approach to generosity, one that doesn't cost you everything, but allows you to give freely, wisely, and with purpose. It's time we rethink generosity. It's time to stop giving so much that we lose ourselves in the process. Let's begin this journey together. Let's explore the truth about toxic generosity and how we can transform our giving to be a source of true blessing, both for us and those we love. When we talk about generosity, we often think of selfless acts of kindness, helping a friend in need, giving to charity, or volunteering for a cause. And these acts of kindness are beautiful and essential to building a caring community. But the reality is, not all generosity is healthy. There's a type of generosity that, while appearing virtuous on the surface, can actually be harmful. This is what we call toxic generosity. Toxic generosity occurs when we give beyond our capacity, when we overextend ourselves, or when we give in ways that neglect our own well-being. It's not just about the quantity of what we give, it's about how it affects us. Toxic generosity can manifest in different forms. Maybe you found yourself saying yes to every request, even when you know you don't have the time or energy to fulfill it. Perhaps you've given so much that it feels like your own needs are constantly pushed aside, or you feel resentful toward those you've helped. Despite your good intentions, this form of generosity often leaves us feeling drained, unappreciated, and disconnected from ourselves. It's important to distinguish between healthy generosity and toxic generosity. Healthy generosity comes from a place of abundance and love. It acknowledges that we have something to offer, and it's given freely, without expecting anything in return. Healthy generosity also respects boundaries. It's about knowing when to give and when to protect your own energy and resources. Toxic generosity, on the other hand, is rooted in a lack of boundaries and a need to please others at the expense of our own well-being. It can arise from guilt, insecurity, or a fear of rejection. It's the kind of giving that expects nothing in return, but also often leads to burnout, resentment, and even feelings of shame. The key to understanding toxic generosity is recognizing that it's not just about giving more. It's about understanding when to give, how to give, and to whom we give. Healthy generosity is balanced, intentional, and self-aware. Toxic generosity, however, is often unconscious, reactive, and fueled by unhealthy motivations. The challenge is to identify where we might be crossing the line from healthy giving to toxic giving, and to take steps to restore balance and wisdom to our generosity. Now that we've defined what toxic generosity is and how it differs from healthy giving, let's dive into the spiritual perspective on generosity. As Christians, we are called to be generous. But that generosity must be rooted in wisdom and a deep understanding of what God wants for our lives. The Bible teaches us that generosity is an essential part of the Christian walk. It reflects God's heart for others and His abundance. But the Bible also teaches us the importance of balance and boundaries in giving. One of the most powerful teachings on generosity in the Bible is found in 2 Corinthians 9:7. Where Paul writes, "Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver." This passage emphasizes the importance of giving freely, without pressure or guilt. True generosity, according to the Bible, comes from a joyful heart, not from a place of obligation or fear. If we give simply to please others or to avoid feeling guilty, we miss the point of generosity. Our giving should be a reflection of God's love, not a reaction to outside pressure. Jesus also speaks about generosity in a way that balances self-sacrifice with wisdom. In Mark 12:31, he says, "Love your neighbor as yourself." Notice that Jesus doesn't say, "Love your neighbor more than yourself." This is a crucial point. We are called to love others, but we are also called to love ourselves. Healthy generosity comes from a place of self-care and self-respect. When we give without considering our own needs, we're not truly loving ourselves, and eventually, we'll have nothing left to give. Jesus knew that true love for others is only possible when we are grounded in our own worth and well-being. In Matthew 6:1-4, Jesus also warns against giving with the wrong motives. He says, "So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do, but when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing." This teaching reminds us that generosity should never be about seeking approval or recognition. It should be done in secret, out of a genuine desire to help, not to inflate our own ego. Toxic generosity often stems from the need for external validation, wanting others to see our selflessness. But Jesus calls us to a different kind of generosity, one that's motivated by love and compassion, not by pride or a desire for applause. The Bible also gives us examples of generosity gone wrong, which serve as cautionary tales. One of the most striking stories is found in Acts chapter 5, with the story of Ananias and Sapphira in this account. The couple sells a piece of property and claims to donate all of the proceeds to the church, but they secretly hold back part of the money. When Peter confronts them, they both fall dead for lying to God. This story isn't just about financial dishonesty. It's about giving with the wrong heart and the wrong motives. Ananias and Sapphira wanted to be seen as generous, but their actions weren't truly self-sacrificial. They wanted the praise without the sacrifice. This is a form of toxic generosity, giving in a way that appears selfless, but is actually rooted in pride and self-interest. So, what does all this mean for us today? It means that generosity is not just about the amount we give, but about the heart behind it. It's about giving with joy, without seeking recognition, and without neglecting our own needs. It's about finding a balance between loving others and loving ourselves. True generosity, according to the Bible, is selfless and sacrificial, but it is never harmful to the giver. We are called to give freely, with wisdom and boundaries, knowing that our well-being matters to God too. When it comes to toxic generosity, the conversation wouldn't be complete without addressing the psychological and therapeutic perspective. In the field of therapy, mental health professionals often talk about how generosity can sometimes go awry and become unhealthy. The idea of overgiving, or giving in a way that harms ourselves, is a serious issue that affects many individuals, especially those who struggle with boundary issues or low self-worth. Therapists often point out that toxic generosity is closely tied to emotional and psychological patterns such as people-pleasing, a fear of rejection, or a desire to avoid conflict. People who struggle with these patterns often feel the need to give excessively to gain approval, to feel valued, or to maintain a sense of belonging. However, this type of giving is not sustainable. It's driven by insecurity and a fear of not being enough, without constantly proving your worth through your actions. In psychological terms, toxic generosity can be seen as a form of self-neglect. It's the act of putting others' needs first while abandoning your own emotional, physical, and mental well-being. This behavior can lead to burnout, resentment, and even depression. Over time, individuals who engage in toxic generosity can start to feel drained and unappreciated, which only reinforces the negative cycle. Instead of feeling fulfilled or joyful in their giving, they feel empty, used, and bitter. And because their giving comes from a place of emotional depletion, it often leads to unhealthy expectations of others in return. If those expectations aren't met, it can spiral into feelings of hurt and rejection. Therapists also warn that toxic generosity can be a way to avoid facing deeper emotional issues. When we overgive, we sometimes do so to avoid addressing our own emotional needs. Instead of taking time to heal or address personal challenges, we hide behind the act of giving. It becomes a defense mechanism, a way to keep busy and not deal with feelings of inadequacy, fear, or unresolved trauma. But as many therapists will tell you, avoiding these emotions only leads to greater suffering in the long run. The path to true emotional healing involves acknowledging and processing these feelings, not burying them under an excessive need to please others. One of the most important therapeutic insights about toxic generosity is the need for setting healthy boundaries. Boundaries are not just about saying no, they're about recognizing your own worth and understanding that you cannot pour from an empty cup. When you are constantly giving to others without taking care of yourself, you're teaching people, often unintentionally, that your needs don't matter. Setting boundaries allows you to give freely, but also gives you permission to care for yourself. Healthy generosity comes from a place of self-awareness, where you understand your limits and honor your own needs. just as you would honor the needs of others. Psychologists like Brené Brown and John Townsend have emphasized the importance of self-care and boundary setting in the face of over-giving. Brown, in her work on vulnerability and shame, writes that healthy relationships are built on mutual respect, which includes respecting one's own needs as much as the needs of others. When generosity is practiced from a place of balance, where self-care is valued alongside giving, it leads to richer, more meaningful relationships. Over-giving, on the other hand, can foster resentment, disappointment, and a lack of real connection. Therapists also suggest that those who struggle with toxic generosity can benefit from therapy that focuses on building self-esteem, learning to assert their needs, and working through the emotional triggers that lead to people-pleasing behavior. By addressing these deeper psychological patterns, individuals can begin to cultivate a healthier approach to generosity, one that doesn't come at the cost of their own well-being. In addition to therapy, mindfulness practices and self-reflection can also be powerful tools in combating toxic generosity. By becoming more aware of your motivations for giving and your emotional state, you can better understand whether you're giving because it's truly in alignment with your values, or if you're doing it to avoid conflict or gain approval. These practices allow you to stay present with your emotions, giving you the clarity needed to recognize when your generosity might be becoming toxic. It's clear that, from a psychological standpoint, toxic generosity can have serious consequences on our mental and emotional health. By setting healthy boundaries, practicing self-care, and working through underlying emotional patterns, we can transform our approach to generosity and cultivate relationships that are both giving and nurturing, rather than draining. Ancient texts from various spiritual traditions also offer wisdom on the topic of generosity, and many of these teachings resonate deeply with the psychological insights we've discussed. While each tradition has its own unique approach to generosity, the central theme that emerges across cultures is the importance of balance and mindfulness in giving. In Taoism, for example, the Tao Te Ching teaches the concept of Wu Wei, or non-action, which can be understood as acting in harmony with the natural flow of things in the context of generosity. This means giving without overextending yourself and without trying to control or manipulate the outcome. Generosity, according to the Taoist perspective, should come naturally, without force or expectation. The Taoist text emphasizes that when we give with wisdom and balance, our actions are aligned with the natural order of the world, and the act of giving becomes effortless and harmonious. In Buddhism, generosity, or dana, is considered one of the key virtues to cultivate. However, the Buddha also warned against giving with attachment or expectation. Generosity, in the Buddhist sense, should be practiced with detachment, meaning that it is given freely and without attachment to the outcome. The act of giving is not about gaining something in return, but about cultivating compassion and selflessness. But Buddhists also understand the importance of balance. Generosity should not come at the expense of one's own well-being or mental peace. In the Buddhist view, excessive giving without mindfulness can lead to attachment, and attachment leads to suffering. Therefore, the key to healthy generosity is mindfulness, awareness of one's limits, and the ability to give without losing oneself in the process. In Hinduism, the concept of dana is similarly revered, but with an emphasis on giving without pride or desire for recognition. Ancient Hindu texts like the Bhagavad Gita, teach that the best kind of giving is done anonymously, without the desire for praise. This type of giving, rooted in humility, is the most pure and selfless. However, there is also a recognition in Hindu thought that over-giving can deplete one's own energy and resources, which is why it is important to give wisely and in moderation. The ancient wisdom here mirrors the therapeutic perspective. Healthy generosity requires knowing your limits and being mindful of how much you are able to give without depleting yourself. Similarly, the Stoics, particularly thinkers like Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, emphasized generosity that comes from wisdom and self-awareness. Epictetus wrote that we should give not out of a sense of obligation or to seek approval, but because it aligns with our moral values and our nature as social beings. The Stoics advocated for generosity that was deliberate, grounded in virtue, and always tempered by moderation. For them, excessive giving was not a sign of strength, but of weakness, because it showed a lack of control over one's own life and resources. Across these ancient traditions, we see a consistent theme. True generosity must be grounded in balance, mindfulness, and self-awareness. Excessive generosity, while seemingly noble, can become toxic if it's not practiced with wisdom. Ancient wisdom calls us to give in harmony with the natural flow of life, to avoid attachment to the outcome, and to recognize our own limits. This ancient perspective aligns with the modern therapeutic understanding of generosity, reminding us that healthy giving is always rooted in self-awareness and respect for our own well-being. By reflecting on these ancient teachings, we gain valuable insights into how we can practice generosity in a way that is both selfless and sustainable. The key is not to give more, but to give wisely, with mindfulness and purpose, ensuring that our generosity enriches both the giver and the receiver. When it comes to cultivating healthy generosity, the key lies in finding balance. Giving freely to others is a beautiful and fulfilling act. But it's important to remember that our ability to give is not infinite. It's essential that we learn to give with intention and purpose, recognizing when to say yes and when to say no. Healthy generosity is not about giving until you're drained or sacrificing your well-being. It's about giving in a way that honors both the needs of others and your own needs. One of the first steps in cultivating healthy generosity is to set clear boundaries. Boundaries allow us to give from a place of abundance, not depletion. They ensure that we are taking care of ourselves first, which is crucial for our physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being. Setting boundaries can sometimes feel uncomfortable, especially for those who have been conditioned to say yes to every request or to put others' needs first. However, establishing these limits is not a selfish act. It's a necessary practice for long-term sustainability. Healthy generosity requires that we protect our own time, energy, and resources so that we can continue to give without feeling resentful or exhausted. Another important practice for cultivating healthy generosity is being intentional about where and to whom we give. Generosity should be rooted in purpose, not just in reacting to every request that comes our way, instead of giving simply because someone asks. Take the time to evaluate whether your giving aligns with your values, your goals, and your capacity. Not every request requires a yes, and not every need is yours to fulfill. It's okay to say no when the request does not align with what you are able to offer. In fact, saying no is a powerful act of self-respect and wisdom. It allows you to reserve your energy for the opportunities where your generosity can make the most impact. Generosity that comes from intentionality is far more powerful than generosity born out of obligation or guilt. When we give with purpose, we are not only serving others, but also honoring ourselves and the resources God has entrusted to us. This kind of generosity creates a cycle of positivity and fulfillment. We give joyfully, knowing that our efforts are aligned with our values and that we are giving in a way that honors both the receiver and ourselves. Another key component of healthy generosity is learning to give without expectation. This is something that spiritual leaders, therapists, and ancient wisdom all agree on. True generosity is not about seeking something in return, whether it's validation, praise, or even a sense of self-worth. Healthy generosity comes from a place of inner abundance and peace, not from a need to prove ourselves or gain external approval. When we give without expecting anything in return, we free ourselves from the burden of expectation and allow our generosity to be a pure reflection of our hearts. This doesn't mean that we shouldn't value the relationships we nurture through giving, or that we shouldn't appreciate the positive impact of our generosity. But it does mean that we don't place our happiness, sense of self-worth, or expectations on how others respond to our giving. Healthy generosity is given freely, without strings attached, knowing that our value does not depend on others' approval or recognition. This mindset frees us from the cycle of burnout and resentment that often comes from over-giving in hopes of gaining something in return. Finally, self-care is a critical aspect of healthy generosity. It's impossible to give your best when you're running on empty. You cannot pour into others when your own well is dry. Self-care doesn't mean being selfish or neglecting others. It means recognizing that in order to be a healthy and effective giver, you need to take care of your own needs first. This includes resting, eating well, taking time for hobbies, and seeking emotional support when needed. By prioritizing self-care, you ensure that you are giving from a place of strength and health, rather than from a place of exhaustion or resentment. Self-care allows you to continue offering your generosity without burning out, and it ensures that the act of giving remains a joy rather than a burden. If you're struggling with toxic generosity, it's important to take a step back and reflect on how your giving habits are impacting you. Ask yourself questions like, am I giving out of guilt or obligation? Do I feel drained after giving? Am I saying yes because I fear rejection or disapproval? These questions can help you identify areas where you may be overextending yourself or giving in ways that aren't sustainable. It's okay to seek help, whether that's through therapy, spiritual guidance, or simply talking with trusted friends or family. Remember, taking the time to evaluate and adjust your generosity isn't selfish. It's necessary for your well-being and for the well-being of those around you. Cultivating healthy generosity is a lifelong process, and it requires self-awareness, discipline, and a willingness to grow. It's about finding the balance between loving and serving others and caring for yourself. It's about giving freely, but wisely, and knowing that your value isn't tied to how much you give or how much others need from you. Healthy generosity is a beautiful expression of love and compassion, and when practiced with balance, it can enrich both your life and the lives of those you serve. So, how can you start practicing healthier generosity today? Begin by setting boundaries, practicing self-care, and giving with intention. Take time to reflect on your motivations for giving, and remember that it's okay to say no when needed. trust that when you give wisely, from a place of balance and self-respect, you are offering something far more valuable than if you were giving from a place of obligation or insecurity. Healthy generosity is not about how much you give, but about how you give. It's about aligning your actions with your values, caring for your own needs, and giving freely and joyfully. By adopting this mindset, you can experience the true joy and fulfillment that come from giving, without the risk of burnout or resentment. Now that we've discussed how to practice healthy generosity, let's explore some real-life examples and stories of people who have struggled with toxic generosity and how they transformed their approach. These stories can offer valuable insights and encouragement, showing us that it's possible to move from unhealthy patterns of giving to a place of balance and true generosity. There are countless examples of people who have realized they were overgiving and found ways to reclaim balance in their lives. One powerful example is that of a community leader who spent years overextending himself to help others, only to find that he was neglecting his own family and personal health. After recognizing the signs of burnout and resentment, he took steps to set healthier boundaries and focused on giving with intentionality. He began to prioritize his family time, set limits on his volunteer work, and started asking for support from others when needed. Over time, he found that his giving was more meaningful, and his relationships grew stronger. Another example is a woman who had been a chronic people-pleaser for most of her life. She gave so much to friends and family that she lost sight of her own needs and became resentful when she felt unappreciated. After seeking therapy, she learned to set boundaries and prioritize her own well-being. She started saying no to requests that didn't align with her values or energy levels. By doing this, she found a new sense of peace and fulfillment in her giving, as she was able to give from a place of love, not obligation. These examples show that transforming toxic generosity into healthy generosity is possible. It takes time, effort, and a willingness to reflect on your habits and make changes. The good news is that when you begin practicing healthy generosity, you will not only enrich the lives of those around you, but also find joy, fulfillment, and a deeper connection to your own heart. As we conclude this journey into the complex and powerful topic of generosity, I want to leave you with a few final thoughts to reflect on. Generosity, at its core, is a beautiful act of love. It can transform lives, heal wounds, and bring people together. But as we've discussed, it's possible for generosity to become toxic when it's done without boundaries, when it comes from a place of guilt or insecurity, or when we neglect our own needs in the process. The key to true generosity is balance, giving freely, with wisdom, and from a place of abundance rather than depletion. As you move forward, take time to reflect on your own generosity. Are you giving from a place of joy, or are you giving because you feel obligated, exhausted, or fearful of rejection? Are you nourishing your own soul, or are you so focused on the needs of others that you've forgotten to take care of yourself? These are tough but important questions to ask. It's okay to say no when you need to. It's okay to set boundaries and protect your own peace. In fact, doing so doesn't make you selfish. It makes you wiser, healthier, and more able to give in ways that are truly life-giving, not just for others, but for yourself as well. True generosity is a reflection of love, and that love is not just for others, it's for you too. Remember the words from 2 Corinthians chapter 9:7, that God loves a cheerful giver, but a cheerful giver is someone who is not weighed down, burdened, or resentful. A cheerful giver is someone who knows their limits, practices self-care, and gives from a place of joy and abundance, not from emptiness or obligation. If you've found that toxic generosity has crept into your life, know that change is possible. You can begin to set boundaries, to practice intentional giving, and to reconnect with the joy of giving without losing yourself in the process. It's a journey that requires self-awareness, courage, and compassion for yourself. By setting healthy boundaries, prioritizing self-care, and giving with intention, you can transform your generosity into something that brings life and joy to both you and those around you. As we close, I encourage you to take a moment to reflect on the impact of your generosity. Are you being intentional? Are you giving freely and joyfully, without expecting anything in return? Or are you giving because it's what others expect, because you fear judgment, or because you've lost sight of your own needs? Allow yourself the grace to step back, to reassess, and to realign your generosity with balance, love, and wisdom. When generosity flows from this place, it becomes a beautiful, life-giving force. Thank you for taking this time to explore this topic with me. I hope that as you move forward, you carry with you the understanding that true generosity is not about how much you give, but about how you give. It's about giving from a heart that is full, a mind that is clear, and a spirit that is at peace. May you continue to be a source of light and love to those around you. And may you also remember that in order to give freely, you must first nourish yourself.